We believe that one reason that people do not internalize what, in a sense, they know about global problems is that for them as individuals to do so is likely to be psychologically harmful. Christians who do not face reality do not appreciate the gift of salvation offered by Jesus' teachings. Most of us suffer thus from the incapacity to deal with reality, and hence we avoid thinking about how we should change. This means that we continue life-destroying lives. People with other problems, such as alcoholism, have long known that to face the reality of their alcoholism and respond wisely, they require the companionship and support of other alcoholics. Medical and psychological support groups help millions of members share their feelings and the truth of their experience with people who are going through similar experiences. The book, that's the book I think that we wrote together, concludes with a discussion of how such support groups for those who need help in facing reality can come into being.
Thank you, John Cobb. And yes, and Nancy, would you like to read our scripture, which is from the Gospel of Matthew, the wedding banquet, chapter 22?
Sure. Priests for Equality, the Inclusive Bible. When Jesus spoke to them again in parables, he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like this. There was a ruler who prepared a feast for the wedding of the family heir. But when the ruler sent out workers to summon the invited guests, they wouldn't come. The ruler sent other workers, telling them to say to the guests, 'I have prepared this feast for you. My oxen and fattened cattle have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding.' But they took no notice. One went off to his farm, another to her business, and the rest seized the workers, attacked them brutally and killed them. The ruler was furious and dispatched troops who destroyed those murderers and burned their town. Then the ruler said to the workers, 'The wedding feast is ready, but the guests I invited don't deserve the honor. Go out to the crossroads in the town and invite everyone you can find.' The workers went out into the streets and collected everyone they met, good and bad alike, until the hall was filled with guests."
Today, for Earth Day, thought we would have a conversation, the two of us, about the Earth Crisis support groups that have come out of your newest book, Confessions, and it is the appendix of the book, and the guidelines for the Earth Crisis support groups are in that appendix. And thank you very much for you invited me to write the last chapter of the book, asking, can women save Christian discipleship? And my answer was yes. And you and I talked as we were thinking about this for several months, thinking, what? How could this book be a curriculum? Or how could this book, blah. We were just stumbling around in the dark. And then we landed on this idea that instead of making it about anything Christian, because you have taught us, John, you have modeled this for many years, and that we cannot be working with Christians or Unitarians or Republicans or, the Americans. We need to work with the Chinese and the Americans and the Republicans and the Democrats and the Presbyterians and the Sufis and everybody. And the great thing about this crisis is that everybody is more and more increasingly being affected by it, having an awakening of the problems, getting really in touch. I think more and more people are about their grief, about their collusion. We are all in collusion with the destruction of the sixth extinction of life on Earth, the only one created by humans. And we all know we're a part of that. And none of us are innocent. We're all participating in that. And in that way, when we think about it, it's easier because we can forgive ourselves and others and really begin to work with everyone, young and old, the clever and the mentally handicapped. Everyone is being affected by this, whether they know it or not, consciously. And we all have a role to play. We all have gifts that are needed in the awakening and then the empowerment of changing course here on the Titanic as we head for this iceberg. So, Easter, you preached for us and you gave us hope. And the hope is that there were people after this great trauma and this great suffering and this horrific injustice in this time of the horrors of the Roman Empire. And here we are living in the horrors of the American Empire and the horrors of capitalism and the horrors of, ecosystem collapse and the extinction of this species, etc., etc. And we are still walking around. And we're still here wanting to worship and praise God and come together in celebration every Sunday here in our little church, in the barn, and sometimes, on the road. We're dancing with the animals, and we're sharing food with them and with our neighbors and with one another. So it's just a miraculous thing. People have survived these horrific things, and they have only survived if they have supported one another in loving communities. So it is this great story of the wedding banquet. I was just telling John, as a minister, I just feel like all I've done for decades is just invite people, and half the time nobody comes. You do these fabulous programs or whatever, really brilliant sermons, and then nobody shows up, or like a handful or something like that. But it doesn't matter, right? Because if the people that you thought wanted the message and wanted the support group and wanted the church service don't want it, then you just go and invite somebody else. Isn't that right, John Cobb?
We'll keep inviting them too.
Oh yeah, everybody's invited. I really think this story, this parable of Jesus, is really about what we're dealing with the Earth Crisis Support Groups. We don't have a budget. We don't have, you have an international following, so that's why I always thought we'd be better off trying to focus on getting these started overseas. But, I think we're going to start one on May 6th. Everybody's invited. You're coming on Zoom. Anybody can come on Zoom. And then we have a local group in Oregon that's going to gather. But I think it's really important for us to have hope. Because you said it in the preface, is it likely that these Earth Crisis Support Groups could really, just take off and change the world and awaken people and give them the love and support that they need to empower them to go out into the world and do fabulous things? Probably not. But it's possible. And think about Mary Magdalene and, the hundreds of people who saw Jesus resurrected, it's amazing. It's an amazing story. The story of love, of God's love for us, and that love being more powerful than anything else survived Jesus's crucifixion. So I am convinced, John Cobb, that in a similar way, these Earth Crisis Support Groups represent something that can survive our denial and our grief and our suppressed fears. So I don't know. What do you think, John?
Well, I think small groups, and not all. The kind of small group that I think is most important is a local one, where people can actually be face to face with each other, but also where people can work together to make sure they are all fed, and that the necessities of life are provided. And there's a kind of even emotional support that physical presence is a real contribution to. And I think that our whole world has been going in a direction that has weakened the power of local communities. Economically, we all buy things from all over the place. And if we trace the food that we eat at a meal, I've heard that probably on the average, it's traveled 1,000 miles. And that if we are dependent on food coming 1,000 miles, when transportation is seriously disrupted, we're going to be in real trouble. But if in our local communities, we are producing some food, if we're really producing enough food, we won't have all the variety we like, but we're not going to starve. And I think the avoidance of starvation is probably number one. Now, we need other things beside food, but water may be even more serious and more of a problem. I didn't quite understand what's going on with water in your place.
We have, let me tell you, because it's exciting. We have a natural water well.
Uh-huh.
And there was a pump and even a house over it, and it hadn't worked in over 25 years. And a very clever gentleman who's a friend of ours, Gilbert, just worked on it for a few minutes and got it to work. He just took some electricity down there and it's working. So then the question is, we have to find out if it's potable water. You know, maybe we can use it for growing plants, but we can't drink it. We don't know any of that yet. So we're sent away to get it tested, and we'll probably have to get a water treatment system. But the good news is, even though Oregon has a lot of water, we in the fire season, you know, had terrible fires, and we didn't necessarily have enough water. Our creek dried out for several months. So at any rate, it's another source of water for the John Cobb Echo Farm. So it's very exciting.
Yes, yes. Well, it's I don't ordinarily think of the Northwest as the area for which water is going to be the major problem. But I think that having potable water is going to be more difficult as other things get more messed up. So that even in the Northwest, it's going to be important not to depend on central suppliers with their purification system, because that may stop functioning for one reason or another. So local communities based on face-to-face that really think about what are the things that we would really need in case we cease receiving goods and services from 1,000 miles away. That's going to be extremely important. And their ability to survive will still depend on friendly relations with their neighbors. Because if you've got plenty of water, but your neighbors don't have any, if you give them all they need, you may all die together. It's going to be a real problem. But if you have what I call communities of communities, there's a chance one can discuss these things in a way that there will be authentic survival. And survival is, but it's very difficult to get people to recognize that these are the kinds of questions that are going to be faced in the future. And the ability to think seriously about matters of life and death and meeting absolutely central needs is in short supply. If you start a conversation about this, most people are going to be eager to shift to something that's happening tomorrow or next week. And so we think that having small groups, and in this case, not as important that they be face to face, but it still would help. Have small groups that support each other in sticking to these issues instead of escaping, trying to find an escape from them. And I think that since everybody needs to be able to face the truth and think wisely about it, the number of people who we would like to get involved in these groups is the population of the planet. But I don't think we're going to reach a high percentage of the population of the planet. But if even 2% of Americans were involved in groups like this, it would have an enormous effect upon American politics.
Mhm.
And we might even decide that we didn't have to be emperor of the world.
You know,
That-
one of the
that
things.
would-
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that would reduce the risk of war immensely.
Yes. No, in talking to people about these groups, one of the things that's come up is that I realize that most people have an idea that they would be trying to gather a group of people who thought like they did. And that is, I think, exactly the opposite of what the vision is. Because I think most of us have some groups in our lives that are, like a political group that we sort of agree with about some issues, or an ecologic group but I think the idea of a group that it has nothing to do with your politics are, what your education is, what your special needs are, what your race is, it has nothing to do with any of those things. It has to do with the recognition that we're in a crisis. Most everybody agrees that we're in a crisis. Whatever they may not agree on the causes or whatever else, but almost everybody will agree on that. And to get people to engage in this deeply spiritual practice, which is to actually share the truth about how they're feeling, and to really share the truth about what's happening in the world. And you learn a lot about people when you ask them what's happening in the world, and they tell you, whatever their news source is, that it's not the same news source that you're using, and that's not a reason not to be in a group together. It's actually going to make your group more interesting, because it's kind of like church, or it's kind of like families. We don't all think the same. We don't all live the same. And, I found this in some of our neighbors, for example, John, who, have, as we know, there's a lot of real polarization. People who are, very vehemently for things that, I've never known a lot of people who were for those things. And that is really important, that we welcome those people into these groups. Because I think many of us that are kind of educated and, like a lot of Unitarian Universalists, a lot of liberal people, are kind of used to being with their own kind. And it doesn't really afford you a lot of spiritual practice. This is what I think the Camp Hill communities have taught me. In a community where some people have special needs, where they're intellectually very, very challenged, and some people are not, and you have a buy-in that everybody is loved by God, and everybody has special needs, and everybody needs to be included. Everybody's feelings need to be heard. Everybody's ideas of what's happening in the world need to be heard. So I think that's what makes this different for me.
Well,
potentially.
I'm assuming that in some support groups like the Alcoholics Anonymous, that there is great variety of political thinking and so forth. So we know sustainability groups don't have to be groups of people who all agree with each other, but they do. To join these sustainability groups, people do need to recognize that there are real problems.
Yes.
And that even they cannot just count on there always being groceries at the grocery store.
Yes.
And they can't, turning on a tap won't always bring. So if people don't think there's any problem to worry about, just want to be left alone, we'll just leave them alone. There's no.
Right.
We certainly can't force ourselves, but
Right.
But I think there are an awful lot of people who, at some level of their thinking and feeling, know that the world is in critical danger. And they may say the danger is that we will believe that there's a danger or something. And whether many local groups can cope with that, I don't know. We'll try.
Well, it's the same, for example, in, let's say, a woman's breast cancer support group. They all may be treated in the same hospital, but they don't certainly have the same socioeconomic or,
Sure.
political ideas or anything else. And there's no problem in people sharing deeply how they're feeling and what's going on in the world. They probably don't share what's going on in the world, politically, and that's what makes this different. But my intuition is that we are in increasingly dangerous times. And, crisis is an invitation for people to do things differently. So I have a feeling some people will recognize when they hear or they receive an invitation, maybe I should try this, and they might not like it, but I have a feeling more and more people are going to be realizing that they really need to be more honest with themselves and with other people. So I'd like to model that right now, John, with you and me, because where two or more are gathered. So in our group, we're just going to have a practice group, you and me, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to just share how I'm feeling, and I'm not going to go the full 5 minutes, which we're going to ask people to do, but I'll just go for a little time, and then I'll ask you to do the same, and then I will tell you about what's concerning me in the world, and then you'll tell me what's concerning you in the world. We'll do it an abbreviated version, and then we'll have a party. No, not really, but so let's just do those two parts, okay? You game?
I think I know what you want, but anyway, I'll hear you first.
Okay. All right. So the question for me is how I'm feeling personally. And I'll say, first I have to share that I was at the beach and with my 3 beloved grandchildren. We were chasing seagulls. I mean, it was just kind of like, heaven on earth and ecstasy. And then my granddaughter needed to go to the restroom, so I ran up the stairs and I fell on the stairs, and I have the biggest knocker on my knee, on my right knee, and my left shin, so it was very embarrassing. And all these people came rushing over. Are you okay? Are you okay? Anyway, and it was like so stunning. It was one of those things where I was like, maybe I'd broken my legs. It wasn't that bad. In a minute, I sat up and I was fine. So that I'm still a little, rough around the edges about that. And then this morning, I participated in a memorial service for my nephew who died of alcoholism. And a bunch of alcoholics that organized it. And it was really a painful kind of experience. It wasn't as painful for me as for my son, who's younger and, I think he inherited impatience from his mother. So at any rate, we kind of struggled through that, but I was really glad we did it. And then, of course, being here with my children and my grown children and my daughter-in-laws. And, my daughter-in-law's expecting another baby, so she's very ill right now in October. So that'll be and we went to Jacob's 5th birthday party. So all of this was really a wonderful experience. But, really honestly, the truth is these are really complicated family relationships. And so I'm kind of exhausted, And as Walt said when I left, Bunny, I don't want to get all these calls where I have to, talk you down off the edge, So it's life, I find it complicated and beautiful, and I feel a lot of, I've been really touched by Earth Day this year. I just am filled with grief about, the things. Just being here in San Diego too and seeing the enormous, it's just so much more congested, and it's just there's so many signs of poverty and stuff. It's just painful. So John, I'm feeling a million different ways. How are you
Okay.
feeling?
Well, I had thought about dumping on everybody, but I'll go back to a rather strange event on Friday morning. In the background of this is that there is a TV program, that has apparently tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who sometimes listen to it. And they invited me to be a regular guest so that I would have responsibility every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, or Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Well, taking on something like that at this stage of my life raises lots of questions. Sometimes I think I would like to retire, but sometimes I think, well, maybe this is an opportunity to make a difference. That has led to some thinking about how I could retire in some other respects, if this was important. In any case, what happened was that I got started and everything seemed to be okay, but something went wrong technically, and my voice ended up being all chopped up and people couldn't understand what was being said. The program was ended early, and the invitation for a long-term relationship was ended.
Oh, goodness.
Well, these kinds of things, I'm not distressed about it because I wasn't terribly comfortable about making the commitment. And this way I don't have to make the decision. But the general sense that I have some things to say that I need to share when I can is very much bound up with my sense of how we are all, and I certainly include myself, shooting ourselves in the foot at a time we need to be really worth thinking and working together. I'm most involved in trying to get China and the United States not to move farther toward war. I think there are people in the United States who want a war. They seem to go out of their way to provoke China, and they have succeeded in humiliating China because Taiwan, which China regards as part of China, is now an American protectorate. And I think that they do this by the threat of nuclear war. And I think they would carry out that threat if China did not yield. So I have feelings of anxiety and upset and relief, and as you were saying, all sorts of other things. And then the fact that I can never count on being able to do what I want to do on a computer. Sometimes I'm thinking more about that than I am about what's happening in the larger world, because I was not sure at 1 o'clock this afternoon whether I could get onto Google. And I see Ron Hines is here and he saved me. So then I stopped thinking about that and became able to worry about the larger problems. I don't have the feeling that if only people would listen to me, somehow everything would be all right. I don't know. But I do think that the biggest problem right now, globally, is that there are very few people who are acting as if they understood what was happening in the world. And I'm including governments, of course, among those who don't do it, but universities are even worse. Churches are slightly better than universities, but nothing to brag about. So that although there is much more awareness that we are in serious problems today, and this gives me much more opportunity to share my concerns with a wider public than I've had in the past. Nevertheless, this situation is not encouraging. I think that the worse the situation is, the more that having small groups of people who really share honestly with each other and who think about what they need to do to prepare just themselves to survive right where they are. And then, of course, also realize that then one group can never survive if everywhere else things are bad. The more intensely we concern ourselves about our own survival, the more we will understand there have to be global changes. I don't know. Have I said enough to you to know how I feel? Because I don't know how I feel.
Thank you. I appreciate it, John. And let's just go into this next part, which is just talk about what's happening in the world. And one of the things that I'm aware of that's happening in the world is, my own family is not able to be very present with what's happening as far as in international politics or in the American situation. I mean that, and who can, all the, it's just overwhelming. I feel obligated to, read the news and watch the news and be informed. I feel like that's the least I can do, and so I'm aware of all the shootings and the famines and the people that I trust that talk about threats of war and the refugees and teen suicide. I don't know, it's just like there's so many horrific problems. So I'm just I guess what's happening in the world for me right now that's important is this Earth Day. I've really had a sense of, I guess it was this memorial service too that I did this morning, and so I don't know. I think also I just am more and more aware of my own sense of grief about and mourning about the destruction of life on Earth. The entire ecosystems. Walt and I, we see these huge trucks. All this logging that's still being done. And I always say really obnoxious things like, look, there's the bodies from the genocide of the trees in the forest, So I'm just aware that I'm aware of a lot, locally, nationally, internationally, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop that. I feel like that's the least I can do, as a global citizen, is to stay somewhat informed. But as far as the issues that are really topical for me right now, I think, these countries in Africa, that have had droughts for, 4 years, and it's like these numbers of people who are dying in famines. This is really upsetting to me, then all the creatures that we don't even ever mention, you know. So I feel like this great awareness of the suffering in the world, and I just really appreciate being able to talk with other people about it, because I just don't know many people that are willing to talk about that. And I thank you, John. You know, you've I've been able to talk with you over the years about this, and but I don't know. I don't know why I've always had this sense of obligation, you know, to be informed about everything that's going on. And I'm not the best informed person in the world, but you know what I mean. I feel like I sort of have some sense, more of a sense of obligation of knowing what's going on, and I'm very concerned. You know, here I am with my grandchildren, and you know, when we're just a few seconds before midnight on the doomsday clock, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, you know, I take this kind of stuff really seriously. So thank you, John. I appreciate we can just talk about it.
Well, I have increasingly felt that the United States has the primary responsibility to change, because it is the U.S. goal to dominate the planet that is the reason there is war in Ukraine now, and the reason that there is a danger of a war with China. As I say, China really doesn't want a war because it knows that it will be nuked in terrible ways. And China doesn't have the nukes that can either ward off an attack. So the relation between the US and China is very one-sided at that point. And the old idea that we wouldn't start a nuclear war because it would destroy everybody, actually the US would get off fairly well. I wish a nuclear war would destroy us, because then we wouldn't have one. But I'm very frightened about US policy at the present time. I think that Americans who realize that we are slipping, that we are no longer clearly number one, that the China-Russia combination is challenging us. The dollar is no longer the only way in which you can survive financially. Many people think that China has shown ability to make things happen in the international world that we haven't even tried to do. If the US is so determined to be number one, it's got to act now. And that it is acting in Ukraine, but what's happening in Ukraine is not working out well for the US. What I fear is that the true believers that the US should be dominating the world are getting desperate, and their desperation will lead to nuclear war. Just having that belief, not that I'm not saying it will happen, I'm just saying we are treading on the edge all the time. At least I feel I understand what needs to change. The US needs to accept a multipolar world. And I don't think that the American people are totally against that. But the neocons who took over total control of our foreign policy after 9/11 They are totally controlled, totally against it. And so I think that being able to see what's happening and who's doing what intensifies the sense of seeking opportunities to share, but recognizing also how very painful the truth is for us Americans, especially, because we have a need to feel righteous about ourselves. And that requires that we deceive ourselves in such drastic ways.
Okay, let's, on that cheery note, we're going to have 30 seconds of our, we're going to pretend I bought the most delicious lentil vegetable soup, and thank you, John, for bringing bread, and we're going to eat, and we're going to have a fun time, we're talking, and then we're going to say, what can we do? What can we do? And then I'm going to say, I know, John Cobb, we're going to start Earth Crisis support groups. Are you in?
I'm a great believer.
All right. Okay, we just modeled it. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Dear Holy One, we come to confess and to ask for forgiveness. We know that we have done things we should not have done, and not done things we should have done. We ask you to forgive us. We ask that you guide us in learning how to forgive others as well as ourselves. God, grant that we may allow ourselves to be guided by you, follow your plans, and perfectly accomplish your holy will. Grant that in all things, great and small, today and all the days of our lives, that we may do whatever you require of us. Help us respond to the slightest prompting of your grace, so that we may be your trustworthy instruments for your honor. May your will be done in time and in eternity by us, in us, and through us. Amen.